Hi everyone, my name is Sean and you're listening to Incredible Discourse. Today's the second episode. We're going to be picking up where we left off, going through the Kojiki, exploring the history and the culture of the Japanese archipelago. Last episode, we kind of kicked it off by introducing the channel, by going over the kind of scope of what we're going to be doing, starting with the Kojiki, going throughout the history of Japan. So now we're going to be picking up in the Kojiki with the spontaneous creation or generation of Izanagi and Izanami, the two deities that will eventually be responsible for the creation of the Japanese islands, the creation of all the deities that kind of make the universe work. So let's get into it. So we pick up today with Izanagi and Izanami. They've just recently come into existence spontaneously, and all of the 7 generations of deities gather together and they kind of decide what needs to be done, if anything needs to be done, but something in fact needs to be done. So what they decide to do is to put Izanagi and Izanami in charge of this process of creation. So they take on the role, Izanagi and Izanami, they take on the responsibility from this committee of deities. They take on the responsibility of having to create the floating land. And these lands will become the Japanese islands. So they're given a jeweled spear. This is the spear that is often seen in the depiction of Izanagi and Izanami as they stand on the heavenly bridge and plunge it into the swirling mass of existence. The spear is often described as a jeweled spear, but the actual character used in the Kojiki is more closely related to like a swamp or bog. And I guess that makes sense because they're using the spear to plunge it into a swirling, boggy mess, and to kind of create a foam, a froth, and from that, as they pull the spear out of the whirling mass, the foam that had accumulated on the edge of the spear drips back down, forming the very first island. Now, this island is called Onogoro, and this is the center pillar of the lands. Today, it exists off the coast of Ahaji, or what is today called Awaji Island. This is right between the part of Honshu that has Kyoto and Osaka and Shikoku. So there's a small island between that area where this island exists, and it's kind of the center of the island chain, the Japanese islands today. And this island is going to be the place from which Izanagi and Izanami do most of their creating. Although they will move around, specifically over to Kyushu in a little bit as the story progresses. So once this island is created, Izanagi and Izanami erect a heavenly pillar, and they also erect a palace, a dwelling for themselves. They use this pillar to walk around. The first time that this is done, Izanami speaks, and then Izanagi follows her, and they produce 2 children. They produce a leech child, and they produce the island of Aha. Both of these they consider unacceptable and are discarded. What's interesting about this encounter is the terms that are used for their copulation are specifically referencing to a kind of traditional marriage relation. But because of the failure in their reproduction with this, the leech child created, the island which they find unacceptable, they need to figure out what went wrong, what happened. So they do a grand divination. And in early Japan, the kind of divinations that occurred were the roasting or cooking of bones. This one is particularly the shoulder blade of a deer. So they will cook it until it starts to crack, and then they'll look at those cracks to kind of get the answer. And what this deer shoulder blade clearly says is that because Izanami spoke first, because the woman proceeded first, the offspring were unacceptable, as the text describes. So they do it again. They go at it. Izanagi decides, they decide together that Izanagi's going to go first. He speaks. They circle the pillar. Izanami follows. She speaks. And the product of this coupling is considered acceptable. So in their creation, the first things that they do start to create are islands. So the first island they created was the one that they are doing the creation on, which is the Onogoro Island. The second island that's created from their first proper coupling is Ahaji. Ahaji Island is the larger island that's off the coast of Onogoro, or if you want to be more specific, Onogoro is off of the coast of Ahaji. They then create another island, and this island is Iyo, the island of four faces, or today it's referred to as Shikoku. And the name of it today kind of tells us about the origins of it, because the island is now called the Four Countries, or the Four Land Island. Historically, the time period that the early part of the Kojiki really describes and starts to talk about is the Yayoi period, the Yayoi transition from a hunter-gatherer societies to a more agricultural. And the names of these islands are big hints, and they give away the fact that this is the time period that they're referencing. So here's an example in Shikoku. The different sections of the islands all reference different types of agricultural products. So we have the four different faces of the island, as the text refers to them as. The first one is Iyo. So Iyo is the name of the island itself, and also a section on the island. Iyo is the lovely princess, which is slightly odd, but we're going to go with it. The second section of the island is the poultry section, which is named the Good Boiled Rice Land. And that's, it sounds pretty good. Good boiled rice. Aha is the third section. It is the place of great food, specifically millet it refers to, right? Millet, that's pretty good. And Tosa, the brave good youth. So, got some brave youths, got some food. Sounds like a productive island. The third island that they create is really a grouping of islands. It's the islands of Mitsugo. So now, the original island, Onogoro, is placed in the center. Let's think of that as, boom, square one. The next island that's created off of it, Ahaji, is created just off the coast of it. Very, very close. If you looked at a map, you would assume very exact same spot. Next, we have Shikoku, which is produced and just kind of is drawn out of the ocean and created from this coupling to the west. It's a big island right to the west of them. Next, we have the Mitsugo. These are the ones we're talking about now. These are produced, and they kind of come about to the north. So far to the north of Shikoku or Iyo, these just small chain of islands is created. And after this small chain of islands is created, we have the island of Tsukushi. Tsukushi is what is today called Kyushu. So the island of Kyushu is then created. Kyushu is located slightly more southwest of Shikoku. So now we have a total of 4 islands. The next island, Iki, is created just north of Tsukushi. So we have a 5th island right there. After that, we have Tsu, or Tsushima, the island of Tsushima. Tsushima is located just north of Iki. Tsushima is an interesting island, and it's interesting because it's a halfway point between the Japanese archipelago and the beginning of the Korean peninsula. This is an island that plays a very important role in the relationships that the Japanese islands have with the continent, with the Korean peninsula, and is going to be showing up again throughout the history of the islands. So, moving on to our sixth island is Sado. Sado is an island that is up to the far northeast of the initial islands that we're looking at right now. And funny enough, today it's still called Sado Island or Sadoshima. And the last but not least, the largest island in the Japanese archipelago today, it is Honshu is created, or at that time the island is called Yamato. This is the biggest island in the chain. It's the largest of the four main islands today, and it has a super long name. So when it was originally created, according to the Kojiki, it was called the Great Yamato Luxurious Island of the Dragonfly, aka Honshu. So after the 8 great islands are created, there's a bunch of smaller, less important, but still significant if they made it into the book, islands that are created after this. Koshima, the little island, Atsuki, Himashima, Chika, and then Futago. There's a couple other ones, but these are just small, miscellaneous islands that are created after the 8 primary ones are. So now that Izanami and Izanagi have all these great islands, they're going to figure out what to do with them. So they're going to put some gods on the islands, right? So they figured out how they're going to make them, who's got to go first, who's going to do what, to create things that are acceptable, as the text says. And now they're going to put that and start creating sentient creatures. So right off the bat, 11 deities are created. So Izanagi and Izanami create 11 brand new deities to put on the islands to help inhabit the world. So the last deity that is born from Izanagi and Izanami initially is the deity of the fire burning. So a swift male fire burning deity. This is a fire god. And as this deity is born, as it's coming out of Izanami, it ends up killing her. But before she can expire, she becomes very, very ill. She lays down, she begins to vomit, she begins to excrete upon herself, and it's just a mess. But from the vomiting, deities are born. From her fecal matter, deities are born. And from her urine, deities are born. So it just goes to show how very potent Izanami is, that even as she dies and as she's expelling toxins from her body, she's still creating life. And so at the point of Izanami's death, a total of 14 islands had been produced and a total of 35 deities had been born. And naturally, with the death of Izanami, Izanagi goes into mourning. And this mourning process births deities. So deities are born from the weeping and the mourning of Izanagi for his deceased wife, Izanami. And during this mourning period, Izanagi gazes upon the fire deity and becomes enraged. He becomes enraged that this one deity that born from Izanami has caused her death. And so Izanagi grabs a heavenly sword, a sword that's been previously mentioned, not by me, but in the text, the 10-grasped blade, and he hacks the fire deity to pieces. And, as is the tradition that we are seeing established, from the blood of the blade, after the hacking and the dismemberment has taken place, deities are born from the blood. They're born from as it drips off of the tip of the blade, the handle of the blade, and the corpse of the fire deity. So, as we can see, pretty much any activity is going to be producing deities. Once Izanagi has finished butchering the fire god, and once these deities have been born, he realizes he's a creator god and decides to go to the realm of the dead to try to find and retrieve his wife. So now here we come to a new plane of existence that we're encountering for the first time. And this is sometimes translated as Hades, because it's just a place where all the dead go, no matter what the quality of person you were. So the name for the underworld, for the realm of the dead, is Yomi. But the characters that are used are actually yellow stream. So this idea of a yellow stream or yellow river to represent a plane of existence for the dead, for the gloomy world, originally comes from China, right? It comes from the Chinese continent, but more specifically, it's first referenced by Mencius, the Confucian scholar. And this is the first time that the term is used or seen, this combination of yellow stream to reference a place of the dying and the dead. Well, I guess not the dying, but just the dead. The already have, they're dead, and this is where they went. So, Izanagi goes to the underworld. He goes to this yellow stream, and it is underground. It's subterranean. So he gets there and he finds Izanami. He's great. Oh, it's wonderful. He's excited. He's really, really happy to see her, but it happens to be very dark here. And he goes to retrieve her and he says, "Hey, I'm here to take you out. I'm here to take you home." But at that point, she had already eaten of the food. She'd eaten from the furnace of Hades, the furnace of Yomi. Here we see this consumption of food of a place to be binding someone or something to that place. So because Izanami has eaten of the food, has eaten from the produce of the furnaces of Hades, the furnaces of this underworld, she's unable to leave. But Izanagi kind of reminds her, hey, we're gods and we kind of made everything. So I need you to go talk to the other underworld deities and you work something out. And we can see here again the requirement of a committee to have something done, to have something decided. So Izanami says, "Hold on a second. I'll go talk to management, to the underworld, right? The underworld deities, and we'll see if we can work something out. I'll see if I can get this approved, and we'll see if we can push this forward." So she goes off back into the darkness to see what she can do and see what kind of deal she can make, because Izanagi is there, and they're also creator gods. So they got some weight to throw around, but it takes a long time for these meetings to go through and for these kind of committees to come to a decision. And in the meantime, Izanagi is kind of just standing there at the entrance of the underworld, not really doing a whole lot. So he gets a little bored. So what does he do? He takes out his trusty comb, snaps a piece of it off, and uses it as a torch. Right? He uses a torch and goes into the underworld because he's impatient. He can't wait anymore. Snaps off the comb, lights the tip on fire, and he goes on in. But unfortunately, this is a land of decay and a land of corruption. So when he finally does make it to Izanami and he sees her and he uses his comb torch to cast a light on her, he sees the wriggling masses of maggots, of insects. He sees Izanami's decaying flesh, and inside her, inside the gaping holes of her body, he starts to see the outline and the living movement of thunder deities. And gazing upon all of this corruption, this defilement, the rotting body of the woman he once loved, he is repulsed by it, and he is taken aback, and he starts to flee. He leaves. And as he starts to flee, Izanami is offended. So she sends the hags of hell after him. These are the warped, tormented souls that live in the underworld. But being a powerful deity that he is, Izanagi, realizing he is being pursued, takes off some of his head adornments and throws it on the ground. And this act This throwing of his headgear on the ground distracts his pursuers long enough for him to make it out of the underworld. Here, the kind of layout of the underworld is looks like a cave entrance. So he makes it out of the underworld, and what he does to kind of contain this corruption and defilement is he takes a boulder that would take 1,000 men to lift, and he places it over the entrance. And when Izanami gets to this blocked off entrance, she is enraged. Then she starts to curse Izanagi. She tells him if every day she's going to be killing 1,000 people, 1,000 more people will be taken down into the underworld. And she's telling him, it's because of me. I'm doing this to you. And like the loving husband that Izanagi is, he says, cool, I'm going to birth 1,500 people every day. If you take 1,000, I'll make 1,500. And we still have a net gain. But what he technically says is that he's going to erect 1,500 birthing huts every day. And each one of these huts is going to correspond to a new birth. And this is the beginning of death as we see it in the Kojiki and in the tradition of the Japanese islands. And as we see throughout this text and throughout a lot of nativist philosophy, the idea of death solely has corrupting elements associated with it. And the only way to deal with the corruption of death is to purify it and to place it away. So when Izanagi comes out of the cave, comes out from the underworld, seals it off, he is filthy himself. So he has to go and ritually and physically purify his body. And like with all activities that happen during this beginning part of the Kojiki, as he takes his clothes off to wash them, the filth that comes off of his clothes become deities. As he bathes, the water and the filth that comes off of his body become deities. And finally, when he washes his face and cleans out his eyes and washes his eyes, from his eyes, his 3 favorite children are born. And these 3 children will go on to become the sun god, the moon god, and the deity of the sea. And of course, we're talking about Amaterasu, Tsukiyomi, and Susanoo. Izanagi takes a special interest in these 3 children of his. He takes each one of them and assigns them responsibilities over different domains. He goes to Amaterasu and he gives her the heavens. He says, this plane of existence, this heavenly plane, you're in charge of it. You run the show. This is what you're going to be focusing on. Tsukiyomi is going to be in charge of the night. So whereas Amaterasu is the sun, and she rules the high plane of heaven and daylight because she is so radiant and beautiful, we have her sibling, Tsukiyomi, which is going to be the ruler of the night and all things that are shadowy and moon-like. We then have the youngest brother, and this is a particularly male deity. Susanoo becomes the deity of the sea. But Susanoo, so distraught over the death of his mother, kind of refuses to do anything. So when Amaterasu goes and takes her position, when Tsukiyomi goes and he takes his position, Susanoo really just weeps. He kind of just sits down. He doesn't do anything. He just mourns. His beard grows out and just generally begins to neglect his duties. Izanagi, seeing how Susanoo has just done nothing with the responsibilities he's been given, decides to expel him from the sea. And that's kind of tough as a sea deity when you get kicked out of the ocean. So what does Susanoo do? Susanoo goes over to his sister, right? The more successful sister, I think we can agree, Amaterasu, the beautiful, shining, radiant sun goddess. But he is also still an emotional wreck. So he starts storming over. He can't stand Izanagi, and he goes right up to heaven. He goes up to the higher planes. He's going there, just because he's got nowhere else to go. When you're a deity and you get kicked out of your plane of that you rule, your choices are kind of limited. So Amaterasu, living in the beautiful heavenly realm, she sees Susanoo coming over to heaven, just storming over to heaven. He's upset. He doesn't look happy. There's something going on. She doesn't know what it is. So what she does is she's like, oh no, my brother's coming to take over. So she takes her bow. She gets in a mighty war stance. And she pulls it back, and she's ready to just take him out if need be. But once he gets closer, she realizes that he's not there to make trouble a lot. I mean, he's there and he's going to end up making trouble, but he's not as aggressive as she thought he was from a distance. But she doesn't really trust him still. And according to the Kojiki and the just the ways of the world at that point, she doesn't trust him. So in a move to gain Amaterasu's trust, they have kids. So Amaterasu and Susanoo, they reproduce together. And they end up producing 8 deities. So the way this is done is that Amaterasu has these magic jewels, right? These jewels that are given to her from Izanagi. And Susanoo has a magical sword that is given to him from Izanagi. It's also the sword that was used to kill the fire god. So Izanagi takes his child murder sword and gives it to his other child. So Susanoo is the one who's been running around with this god-killing sword, which also can kind of give you some context of why Amaterasu's a little concerned when he's charging up into heaven with his god-killing sword. He's very upset. And she doesn't know what's going on. So you can see why she takes out her bow and is ready to just drop him. So the way that they reproduce, the way that they make children together is that Susanoo gives Amaterasu his sword. And she uses that as her inspiration to produce children, to produce deities that come off of the sword. And likewise, Susanoo really wants those jewels that she has. And he cries out and says, I want your jewels. Probably not like that, but he's requesting the jewels. And from every request, a new deity is born. Susanoo makes 3 requests, and 3 deities are born. Amaterasu takes the sword and produces, I believe, 5 children from that sword. So one of them is clearly more potent than the other. Also a shining, radiant sun deity. But, who's to say? Susanoo's still pretty popular. So after these children are produced, Susanoo gets it into his head that he won. He won reproduction. He's like, yes, we did this. Look at your kids. Look at my kids. The ones that I'm responsible for are clearly better. And he's referencing the sword that Izanagi, he's referencing the sword that Amaterasu used to produce her children. And he said, I inspired that. I inspired 5 deities. I clearly won. And he goes on a victory lap. But the problem with Susanoo is that he's rash, and his idea of a victory lap is going over to Amaterasu's fields and kind of just destroying them, breaking the boundaries between them, defecating all over where the food is grown. And he kind of just makes a mess. Like he just goes in and trashes the place. But Amaterasu, being the kind, benevolent deity she is, she sees it and says, oh, well, maybe... She tries to make excuses for him. She says, maybe he was trying to not waste land by separating the fields, and maybe he was just trying to help make them more fertile by shitting all over them. And that's really not the case. She just thinks he's trying to help, but he's also drunk, and that he's just a sloppy mess. So Amaterasu forgives him. She's like, okay, I can deal with it. You're kind of a mess. sort yourself out. So she goes back. She goes into her domicile where she's weaving. She's got some weaver assistants. They're putting together these really nice tapestries. And while they're doing this, Susanoo, as is his custom, makes a mess of everything. So he breaks through the roof of the weaving hall, and he throws a flailed horse. He finds a horse somewhere. He probably invented horses so he could flay them. Flays it, punches a hole in the roof, chucks in the flayed horse. The flayed horse ends up crushing one of Amateratsu's little weaving helpers, and as you can understand, she's not very happy about that. So Amaterasu, very upset, decides, nope, pause, I'm leaving, and being the sun deity, the world is plunged into darkness. And that becomes the state of the world for a while. Susanoo, acting rashly, acting drunk, running around, causing problems, causes the sun deity to have enough of it and say, you know what? I'm just going to walk away. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go away where I don't have to deal with your garbage. So she leaves. The world is plunged into darkness. The heavens are plunged into darkness. The underworld was in darkness. But if it wasn't, it would be plunged into darkness. And more than just Susanoo realizes that the sun deity has left. All of the other deities and all of the islands recognize that the sun goddess has abandoned them. So 800 myriad deities. And what is interesting to note is that the term myriad, literally translating to as about 10,000, is used as a lot. It's used as like an uncountable number. We can count it, but you know what I'm talking about. So 800 myriad deities assemble together, and they get the facilitator of the group. They get the deity thought includer. So you can tell by his name, he includes other people's thoughts or deity's thoughts. He's the communal thinker for everybody. So they put together a plan to figure out where Amaterasu went and how to get her back. So the thought includer, it's a pretty great name. I'm really into it. So the deity thought includer, he sends out some pigeons, some birds to do some stuff, to collect stones and mineral and ore. And so they create a bunch of things. They create a mirror. This mirror is a copper alloy mirror. It's a shiny bronze, and touching once again on the historical period that this mythology references. It's a mirror that was created, and it was popular in the Yayoi period, where bronze technology first comes into the Japanese islands. So the deities have a beautiful mirror created. They have a beautiful string of beads created, and they get a deer's shoulder blade. For divining, of course. So they set the stage to lure out Amaterasu. Well, first they find where she's hiding, and then they set the stage to lure out Amaterasu. So the first thing they do is they get a tree. Really, really big tree. They pull it up out of its roots. It's a tree with 500 branches. And they set it down right in front of the cave that Amaterasu's hiding in. If you haven't noticed, hiding in caves is pretty popular in this time. So what they do is they take this tree, they place it down. In the upper branches, they string the beads around, those beads that they had created. And then towards the middle branches, they hang the mirror, the shiny, beautiful, reflective mirror. They put it right in the middle. And then towards the bottom, the lower branches of the tree, they put the pacification offering. And to get Amaterasu's attention, they start to have a celebration. They start singing, they start dancing, they have making all sorts of noise. They're declaring how beautiful and bright and radiant everything is, even though Amaterasu's in the cave and not shining, and they're actually in darkness. So the idea is they want to convince her that there's a more radiant deity out here, which doesn't actually come up in the text itself, but is often the case. So they use the mirror in the traditional, in one of the popular tellings of it, to point right at the entrance of the cave. So as Amaterasu cracks open the cave, her own radiance shines out, reflecting off the mirror, bouncing back at her, and she believes there to be another sun goddess out there. And although she's upset and mad and frustrated, there's one thing that she is not going to stand for, and that's being replaced. So as she cracks it, and she sees that radiance shining back at her from outside, she's convinced there's something else out there. So she opens it up and comes out to see what's going on. And right then and there, all the other deities slam the door shut so she can't get back in. And it kind of just ends there. She kind of gets over it. She comes out and she restores light to the heavens and the earth, except not the underworld, because it never had light to begin with. And now that the crisis has been averted, the 500 myriad deities, if we recall them from the beautiful plan, they now look at the person responsible. And that person is Susanoo. And Susanoo gets it hard. He gets his beard shaven. He gets a massive fine. And he gets all of his nails removed. Fingernails, toenails, all get pulled out. Not a good time for Susanoo. He's not feeling too happy. Susanoo then begs for forgiveness, but especially to this deity, the Princess of Great Food, because this all started from him going into the rice fields, and just kind of defecating all over the place, vomiting, soiling himself, soiling the fields, breaking things, just all sorts of unpleasantness. But after all of the punishment that he's received from the myriad of deities, he lets them all know, hey, I've reformed, I can be better, I can behave myself, I can control myself. I'm the sea storm god, so what could go wrong? So he goes to the Princess of Great Food, and she forgives him for all of the trouble that he's caused everyone. And so what she does as a gift is she presents him with food. But being the deity of food, she spits food out into her hands, which is rice and barley and delicious foods, and she just essentially just excretes food. That's her thing. She makes food. She's the food god. But not just any food god. She is a great food god. Seeing that, how she produces it, and thinking back, Susanoo looks at the field and says, hey, wait a minute. I remember when I did that. It was terrible, and it destroyed everything. So he thinks the great food goddess is trying to feed him feces and urine and vomit. And this outrages Susanoo. And Susanoo, being the level-headed deity he is, takes his sword and butchers her. And with the great food goddess being dismembered and destroyed, products of plenty spill forth from her body. Silk is produced from her hair, rice comes from her eyes, millet comes from her ears, beans come from her nose, maybe? Barley springs from her loins, and beans spring from her rear. But they're big beans. Ancient Japanese deities love big beans and are incapable of falsehood. But something they are capable of doing is punishing Susanoo. So, because of Susanoo's continuous and persistent, reckless and violent behavior, he is exiled from the realm of heaven, and he is cast down to earth. A place where, once he is cast, he starts to have his misadventures, and through those misadventures, he starts to make his mark on the world. That ends it for today. Next week, we're going to be following the misadventures of Susanoo. Once he gets down to earth, we're going to see the kind of contributions he's made and the lasting effects that they've had on the world of Japanese mythology. So, thank you for listening. This is Incredible Discourse. We're out.